It's a moral consensus that companies ought to exist only to enrich their shareholders, and any other externality, aka your health and well-being, should matter to them only insofar as it helps their investors make money. So if you would like to break this normative consensus, which I recommend, you don't have to take out an op-ed in the New York Times. Don't worry, they won't print it anyway. You just have to tell a friend that you don't agree. That's it. Just say it out loud. Get practice saying it out loud. You don't need to be on stage. And then start to act like you believe it. When some product gets ruined, don't buy it. When you see someone trying to do the right thing, reward them with your business. Go work there. Say something nice about them. Post on social media. Like, there's so many things you can do to break the consensus. And yet most of us feel too afraid to take that first step. Believe me, once you take the first step, the subsequent steps are all a lot easier.
Eric, I wanted to say that I loved your new book, Incorruptible, for a number of reasons.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm going to just briefly summarize some of them. First of all, to me, I don't know how you say it as the author, but to me, it's a business book, but it's not a business, or it's not just a business book. There's also a...
You noticed, yeah.
Okay, so there's also a philosophical element in there which I loved. Also, you talk about the right values in business, the human element of entrepreneurship and business, which is even more important. I mean, it's always important, but especially today, if we think about things like AI and technology in general, there are so many technologies today, including AI, that can be used for good. They can also be used for bad. So we need to be careful. There's a phrase you use in the book, which is wonderful: human flourishing. The goal in business should be to help humans flourish. And just one final thing, when it comes to profit in particular, you say that you warn against practices that can be common in business, practices that steal profit from the future and from future generations and bring it back to us, to the present, at the expense of a better future. So for all of these reasons and many more, I just wanted to say thank you for writing the book. I loved it.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say. Yeah, it's not really a business book. You're right. And I wondered if people would notice because, we live in a world of categories and strict categories. And so I thought, well, maybe to ease people into it, we'll start the book more like a traditional business book. And then as the book continues, my goal was to break the rules of the genre altogether, exiting the genre of business and entering other genres altogether. So I'm pleased, like as a literary matter, I'm glad that came through this book. Yeah, it was a labor of love for sure.
I noticed that, and let's talk about first of all the title, because I have to say, Eric, I envy you a little bit because I also published a book a few years ago, Confident Presenter, and at the end of May, like yours, I'm going to publish my new book, Timeless Presenter, and
exciting.
I thank you. I love books with just one word as the title. And I've always dreamed of being able to do that. But for me, for my 2 books, 2 words, I never managed to find the right word for me. You did it, and I understand that the title comes from a conversation you had with the founder you were working with.
Yeah, that's true. Oh yeah, you've done your homework. Yeah, first of all, this is my first time with the one-word title also. All of my previous books, all 3 of them, are 3-word phrases with "the" as the first.
The Lean Startup.
The Lean Startup, the Leader's Guide, the Startup Way. I thought that would be my formula forever. But I actually wrote most of this book for multiple years, worked on this book with no title. It was just called Untitled on Governance, my poor publisher. And I really was struggling to figure out, like, what is that encapsulation that would really make it clear. And it wasn't like I had the conversation and I said, oh, that would be a good book title. The conversation actually happened years ago when I first started writing the book. I was talking to a founder who was trying to build a really cool startup in the humane technology space. Like, the idea was to take an existing technology and reimagine it so that it put human beings at the center. I just saw a podcast episode, I think it was with Casey Newton, talking about, like, if you want to know what the issue with Instagram is, just imagine if everyone at Facebook came into work one day and asked themselves, like, what would it look like if we reimagined Instagram to be good as possible for the health of teenagers? Would it look any different? And when you realize, like, not only would it look different, it would be unrecognizably different, then you're like, oh, okay, then the goal must be something else. So he wanted to build a technology that really was reinvented in that way. And he was having the hardest time raising money, hardest time getting anyone to take him seriously. Just people were so condescending. They'd be like, oh, that's nice. After you get to product market fit, then you can worry about stuff like that. Anyway. And I was telling him, the very nascent version of the book and what I thought he could do differently. And I said, I was kind of on a roll. And he was like really getting into it, and I'm getting into it, and we're like, yeah, this and this. And I'm like, look, you got to have an ethos, you got to have a character, a company that stands for something particular, but also has to have structural integrity, the ability to resist the pressure to not just the temptation of financial gravity, but also the outside pressure that, we're going. And at the end of my riff, I said, if you do this, you can make this company into an incorruptible force for good. And he broke into tears, and he was like, that's. He's like, finally, I think he just felt seen in a way that he hadn't before. He's like, that's what I want to do. And nobody will talk to me about it. They don't even engage with my arguments in good faith. They just pat me on the head and say, okay, that's nice. But anyway, how are you going to make more money? It's that conversation stuck with me. It was a very, very powerful moment for me and for him. And it stuck with me many, many years later. And I was actually telling my wife the story because she was asking me, this is very long later, and I was struggling with the title of the book. And I was saying, I just can't figure out what to say. She's like, well, tell me why you wrote this book. And I told her that story. She's like, that sounds pretty good. And I was like, oh. And what's funny is that I had been thinking a lot. It's like two parts of my brain were working at separate spheres. I don't know. I'd been thinking in the book, what do we call this phenomenon of companies that become extractive, of the ways in our economy, we have so many now, where you can make money without creating any value whatsoever. And the phenomenon that the more successful an organization becomes, the more prominent it becomes as a target, the more it's worth stealing, like in the parable of the golden goose. And I had settled on the idea that we should call that phenomenon the same way our grandparents and our great-grandparents would have called it. They would have said that's corruption. Today, we can hardly call anything corrupt, but they didn't have trouble with that. They were very judgmental about these things. And they had heeded an ancient warning that these practices are actually very dangerous. They're corrosive to society. And so I've been thinking about calling it corruption. And then I told the story about being incorruptible. And I'm like, aha. So that's how it came.
Perfect. You mentioned the word ethos, and I heard you say that you don't like words like company culture or stakeholders, and I don't like those things, those words either, jargon in general. When it comes, because you said ethos, you made me think about something. In your experience, do you think that there are some small communication decisions that founders, entrepreneurs, business leaders can make that can have a big positive long-term, you talk about short-term versus long-term impact on a business, on a company, or in particular on a company culture, on ethos?
Yes. So yes and no. And this is something that I think a lot of leaders get wrong. And the reason I really tried to write the book without using it. I tried to really stay away from modern, trendy business jargon, called consulting speak, as much as I could. So I use a lot of old-fashioned words like ethos rather than culture, or fiduciary rather than stakeholder, because I wanted to be more precise in my meaning. And I feel like a lot of modern words have become meaningless. Not that they're wrong, but just through overuse. So many people competing for the definition of it. You see it in the ESG movement, where no one can even agree on what the ES or the G means. I didn't want to fall into that trap. It is critically important. It's like simultaneously critically important that we communicate our values properly, and also that we not see it as a primarily communication challenge. So here's what I mean. Let me tell it by way of a story. I think it might be easier to grasp.
Even better. Yeah.
In the book, I tell the story of Cloudflare. So Cloudflare, on its surface, is a very humble company. When they started out, it was just a firewall in the cloud. And although the founders were MBAs, they did not like modern, trendy consulting speak either. And they wouldn't allow anyone to say that the company had a mission or values. They just hated that kind of language. If you said, what's the mission statement? They'd smack you in the face and be like, we're just a cloud. We're just making a firewall in the cloud. So get wrecked. What are you talking about? But over time, they were having lunch a couple years in. Although the company had no mission statement, it actually had a very well-defined mission. And although it had no cultural values on the wall, it actually did reflect a very particular ethos. They found this out the hard way when there was a series of democracy protests. I can't remember in what country. And they were being suppressed. Basically, the websites for these democracy protesters were being attacked by sovereign governments. Nation state actors were trying to take this thing down because they found it threatening to their prerogatives. And these companies, these protesters were reaching out to tech companies for help. And they'd reached out to all the big Silicon Valley companies that you would imagine they'd been turned down. And Cloudflare was like, why are we the ones who have to do this? Like, seriously, we're like a tiny startup and we're the ones going to bat. We're going up against like nation state hackers to defend democracy. But all these big companies had become total cowards and they wouldn't do it. So they did. So they did stuff like that, even though these customers were like on the free tier, paying them no money. There was like no upside, all downside of having to like deal with this incredibly expensive denial of service attack. Anyway, it was the right thing to do. So they did it. So there was a kind of company where they made those kind of principled decisions just because. But they had no formal guide for it. They just did it. It was an emergent property of the organization itself. Anyway, a couple of years in, they're having lunch one day. And one of the engineers says, you know why I like working here? I feel like this is the first place I've ever worked where we're really working to make a better internet. And everyone's like, yeah, make a better internet. That's why I'm here too. Everyone's like, make a better internet. Oh, that sounds cool. Someone asked Matthew Prince, is that our mission statement? He's like, no, stop that. We don't have a mission statement, just a firewall in the cloud. But in the company, the phrase make a better internet, circulated and circulated. And eventually his employees had to convince him, no, it's not our mission statement. It's our mission. This is our purpose. This is why we're here and why we exist. So they adopted it formally. And in fact, later, they even codified their values, the first of which is actually be principled. So this is going along one day. Everything's going fine. The company's growing. Now, the thing you got to understand this story, and it's very important to understand this little detail. At the time, and I'm going to tell you this story, Cloudflare was a freemium product, meaning most customers got the whole suite of services for free, but the paid customers, a certain number of features were behind the paywall. And when you make a freemium product, it's very important that there's a logic to which features are in which category that customers perceive as fair. So generally speaking, if something costs you money, you put it in the paid tier. Customers understand if it's expensive for you, then they have to pay for it. That's only fair, right? So that's how it was. Their number one most important feature in the paid tier was SSL encryption, web encryption. Now today, it's kind of hard to understand for people coming up on the web today. Today, every website is encrypted on the web by default. It's considered completely normal. But in those days, it was rare. And the story I'm about to tell you is part of the reason why we all have this expectation that we should enjoy the privacy powered by encryption naturally. So Matthew Prince, again, is chatting with one of his engineers, like a young engineer, not someone important in the hierarchy of things. And the engineer asks him this question. He says, boss, isn't our mission to make a better internet? Uh-huh. Well, isn't an encrypted internet a better internet? Sure. Well, wouldn't it be better for the whole internet if more people had encryption? Sure. So I'm with you so far. Well, then why do we charge people for encryption? Shouldn't we give it away for free? Now, most people hearing this story are just like tearing their hair out. Like, come on. This is like business is rife with people like this. Who are just like, let's give our product away for free for no reason. And your job as a manager and as a leader to be like, shut up. In the nicest possible way. Thank you for your buy-in. Appreciate your input, but I need to redirect you. Remember, we have a corporate strategy. This is how we make money. Our valuation is powered. There's no margin, no mission, blah, 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 blah. But Matthew didn't do any of that. He told me later, he was like, once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Like the logic of that statement was completely right. And so he said, okay, let's figure it out. And his whole team was like, what? What do you mean figure it out? It's like, yeah, well, we can't just give it away for free. We would bankrupt the company. We still have to keep our runway intact. So let's find a way to drive the cost of giving this away down so that we can afford to do it. And they worked their butts off. They spent a huge amount of time. They had to rewrite the technology to make it more affordable to operate. They had to do these really complicated biz dev negotiations with the certificate authorities to buy the certificates for cheap. Anyway, it was not trivial work. And as they got closer and closer to the moment of releasing it, a conventional company would have had so many off-ramps to bail out of the story. They could easily have been like, this is too hard. Why are we doing this extra work? No one's asking us for this. In fact, this is going to make us less money. So why are we doing it? They could have, on a later stage, been like, wait a minute, now that it's working, we don't have to give this away for free. We could just pocket all these savings and our margins would go way up. Why not just aren't higher margins better? Why not? When they got to the point of releasing it, they had to tell their board, hey, we're going to do this. The board was like, well, are you worried that conversion rates might go down? They're like, oh yeah, they probably will. But we're going to do it anyway. They did the experiment. They released it to great fanfare, got a lot of good press out of it. And in fact, their conversion rate, like the more they advertised it, the more their conversion rates went down because people were like, oh, great, I don't have to pay for this anymore. Even better. And again, most companies would have bailed out at that point. Like, oh my God, but they stayed the course. And of course, they were rewarded. Eventually, they got so much more growth as this became an industry standard that they had more than 10 times the traffic, more than 10 times the signups, more than compensated them for their loss of conversion rate. But the key is that they didn't calculate the ROI of this action. Because in business, the most important actions, the most important decisions a company will ever make are ROI negative by definition. Because when we do the right thing, when we build up our trustworthiness, the costs of doing so are very tangible, but the rewards are intangible. So how can we possibly score? So every time someone shows up with a spreadsheet to stack rank by ROI, they make it impossible to do the right thing. That's kind of why our society is collapsing left and right. So now back to your question about communication. So this simple phrase, make a better internet, this simple commitment to be principled, these snappy, clear phrases allowed the whole company to reason about what the right thing to do was. And when we say right and wrong in a corporate context, in an organizational context, we live in such a polarized age. I want to clarify. Right and wrong doesn't mean like absolutely morally right. Every person on earth agrees. And wrong doesn't mean Satan himself made the decision. Okay. Right and wrong in an organizational context means right as it relates to the consistently held values of the organization, those values which are aligned with human flourishing, like you mentioned before. And in fact, you see examples where companies do the quote unquote right thing, and even customers or investors who disagree with the decision admire the company for having made it in a consistent way. You see that in, for example, Costco's pressure they've come under to abandon their DEI programs. They adopted those programs when nobody cared. They kept those programs when DEI became super popular. And then once DEI became super unpopular, all of a sudden, they kept the programs the same the whole time. And they said, listen, we thought this was the right thing to do before when it was unpopular. We thought it was the right thing to do when it was popular. We thought it was the right thing to do now it's unpopular again. We don't care. And they had a shareholder vote. Someone tried to force a vote to get them to get rid of those policies. And 98% of shareholders voted with them. Costco's retail base includes, its investor base includes many of their retail shareholders, millions of them. So you're telling me that not a single one, like every single one of Costco's like millions and millions of customers is woke? Give me a break. People who disagree with DEI nonetheless respected Costco and supported their right to do it their way. So from a communication perspective, our goal in crisp, clear communications about ethos is not to change the company by coming up with a snappy new phrase, but rather to build the company in such a way that we can clearly and simply articulate these values in ways that normal people can understand.
I can see now with the story why you started your answer by saying yes and no. It's clear. And you mentioned it already, but perhaps we can unpack in a little bit more detail. There's a massive challenge there when it comes to having external pressures. You mentioned it could be investors, it could be the board, it could be the pressure of meeting short-term targets instead of focusing on your original long-term vision. And what else do we need to add here when it comes to, again, from a communication perspective, if we think about those external pressures?
Yeah. So part of the problem is that modern companies are weak. And what I mean by weak is not that they're evil, but just that they cannot stand for anything in particular for any particular length of time. They are fickle, they're easy to influence, but interesting, they're also bureaucratic and slow and intransigent. So if you try to transform them for the better, it's like impossible. But if you want them to become more selfish or like, get excited about some new fad, that's easy. It's like they're easy to influence in all the wrong ways and very difficult to influence for the better. Why? Like, it's a very strange set of circumstances. But if you ask people what they hate about their job, this is almost always on the top of the list. We're just doing dumb stuff to make the quarter for no reason. But then, like, if we actually try to like invest in quality or craftsmanship or any kind of long-term plan, we can't do it. Like, what's up? I think there's two things that are causing this that I think most people are blind to. They don't really understand. The first is what I call financial gravity in the book. This book is about not the surface level attributes of organizations, the stuff that we spend all our time obsessing about, which are important things: culture, strategy, vision, business model. Those things are important. Org chart. But they're not the most important thing. because organizations are shaped in a very fundamental way by the underlying forces that act on them. And I use the metaphor of gravity in the book because if you tell me I don't believe in gravity, it's like, doesn't matter. Gravity sure believes in you. You jump in the air, you come right back down to earth. There is a force that is pushing companies to behave in this very consistent way. The fact that you know it's a force is that almost every company, even ones that began in different decades, different founders, different industries, different cultures, they all wind up in the same lame place. So why? So once we understand that this force is acting on organizations, their weakness becomes more clear. If they are doing things that are in line with what the mob wants, with what the crowd wants, the values of our financial system, they get rewarded. And so they'll jump, they're addicts for that hit. They'll do anything the drug dealer demands. But if you try to get them to do anything else, it's difficult. They're inconstant. They have good intentions, but the drug, overrules their intention. But at the same time that this pressure exists and has been growing because we've financialized everything. So we've been living through an era of growing financialization, meaning more and more pressure. We've also adopted a set of corporate best practices that are weakening by design. This generally goes under the heading of shareholder primacy, but there's a lot of these techniques. And in the book, I show how almost all of these techniques, these so-called best practices, not only are they like morally dubious, but they're actually value destroying. There's a whole chart with all this academic evidence in the book called Best Practices Destroy Shareholder Value. So this is a kind of lethal combination because we're putting companies under more and more pressure and we're building them to a more and more flimsy structure. And we're all living the consequences. I feel like this can sound very abstract to people. They're like, well, what do I care if, big giant companies are like acting dumb? Like what else is new? But like we live the consequences every day. I'll tell you a funny story. I was traveling with a group the other day and we went out to dinner 2 nights in a row. And the first night, someone recommended we go to a certain restaurant. They hadn't been there in a few years, but they said, this place is good. We went there, we sat down, we took one bite of the food. The person's like, hold on, I need to go on my phone. I'm like, dude, that's rude. What's going on? Well, he's like, I just need to check. Yep, I thought so. This restaurant's been taken over by private equity. I can taste it. And we're like, ugh. Yeah, that's exactly it. Everyone's like, oh yeah, the taste of, we all know the flavor of private equity owns your favorite restaurant. We went out to dinner the second night to a different restaurant. Different friend had suggested it. We sat down, we took one bite, and someone was like, is this the same crappy private equity firm? Like, we looked it up again. It's like, oh no, 2 different firms, same gross taste. What is going on? And of course, this is not just restaurants. There's all kinds of evidence in the book. For example, when private equity firms take over nursing homes, death rates of the patients go up. When they take over hospitals, it's similarly grim. You don't even want to know what happens when they take over newspapers. It's a malign force, but it's not private equity in particular that's a villain. We see the same thing when companies go public, when they get acquired by a public company, or often when they just adopt a board of independent directors who are slaves to these best practices. The same kind of exploitative logic kicks in. Now, to your question about communication, I got to give credit to Rory Sutherland, the British marketing guru. He has this whole rant about how generally in modern business, we reward people for cost cutting and we have no accountability for the brand consequences of those cost cuts. So what happens is, again, we're stack ranking everything by ROI. We've built a system that systematically rewards value extraction. If you can figure out a way to jack margins up by harming the product and making it worse in a way that customers don't notice immediately, you get rewarded, you get promoted, stock price goes up. And unfortunately, AI is being marketed almost exclusively as this human replacing cost cutting tool with none of these consequences being taken into account at all. Meanwhile, if you're trying to build a new product, if you're trying to create innovation in an organization, you are held infinitely accountable for every little mistake. So it's like we have an absolutely 2-track double standard system where the people who are trying to make everything worse are consistently rewarded and held to a very low standard, and the people that are trying to make things better are held to an impossibly high standard. And then we wonder, why is everything getting better? Why? I mean, Cory Doctorow over at Memorly calls it enshittification. Why do we see this phenomenon where products are just getting worse and worse and worse?
Before we continue with this episode, I just want to share a few resources that I think will be super useful for you. The first one is check out either my book, Confident Presenter, or my colleague Phil Wakenall's book, Business Presentation Revolution, or both. These are books for business owners and leaders who want to take their presentation skills to a higher level. To make the most of the books, take the Confident Presenter Scorecard, which is an online tool that allows you to assess your presentation skills for free in less than 3 minutes. And then also, at the moment, I'm running a series of free presentation skills web classes, and I'd love to see you there. The links are in the show notes. Now, let's go back to the episode. You're talking about what the system rewards.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know that people stop believing a message when the actions and the incentives don't match it. So we say something and then we do something, or the incentives we put in place, it could be in an organization in this case, are not aligned with what we're saying. How can we align what we say as founders, entrepreneurs, business leaders with what the system, with what the organization actually rewards?
Yeah, this is one of the most fundamental questions in the book. And again, it is on the one hand a communication challenge, and on the other hand not a communication challenge, because we want to bind the organization. We want it to be committed to something. So of course we have to tell it what to do. And I think a lot of managers really misunderstand, and this is why the book is a work of philosophy more than a traditional business book, because we have to confront the question of what is the nature of an organization? What is it? People think this is such a dumb question. It's like we all know the answer. But if you ask people what is an organization fundamentally, you'll get like 10 different answers. In fact, if you look in the economics and management literature, there's like hundreds of answers, so many. And you read every great thinker who's tackled this problem, they tend to see the body of an organization the way a doctor sees the body of a human patient. If I'm a subspecialist in neurology, I tend to think, just unconsciously, I think that a body is basically a container for a nervous system, and the nervous system is the primary thing. But if I'm a gastroenterologist, I'm like, I don't think so, man. Like, I don't think that's quite right. And if I study the heart, I'm like, guys, it's the heart. Like, you take the heart away, you're dead. And like, even the guy who studies the skeletal system will be like, take the bones away, you'll be dead too, right? Like, they all feel the same way. If you take my thing away, the thing would die. So therefore, the thing is my thing. And so managers, they see the fact that they can command the organization as like, if I say jump, it says how high, right? Like, I command it to do a thing and it does it. If I command my subordinates obey, as proof that I am in control of the organization. But think how silly this is. If you think the thought that your arm should go up, if you think the thought I want to jump, your body will do it. So you say, oh, I'm in control of my body. But I'm like, oh, good. You have a cut. Why don't you command your body to heal it? Oh, you're getting fat? Why don't you command your body to not have diabetes? Why don't you command your body to heal an illness or repel an invader? You don't have any control over that stuff. There's an immense intelligence that operates within your body that you have nothing to do with. But then when people hear that, they're like, oh, there's nothing I can do, so I can eat whatever I want. No, you cannot command health, but you can cultivate it. If you hit the gym, if you eat right, if you engage in the right meditative practices, you can improve your health and well-being quite a ways. The same thing is true for organizations. Organizations are intrinsically, they are a category of thing we call emergent intelligences. Same thing actually that the transformer architecture is that powers most AI, which is an interesting convergence of facts. An emergent intelligence, I think, is better. You're better to think of it as a living being. It's alive. So just like with a human body, managers and leaders can cultivate health, but they cannot command it. You can urge your employees to do the right thing, but you can't make them do the right thing. So what you have to do is figure out, if you want to have your company stand for something particular, you have to figure out how to not only communicate that intention, but also to wrap it up, package it up in the systems and incentives that align every person the organization touches. And the book is a lot about the practical techniques of how to do this alignment. Can I tell you another story?
Absolutely, yeah, feel free.
A very important character in the book is a guy named Saul Price. And Saul Price was an exceptional communicator, but not through his charisma, but through the singular clarity of his ethos. Let me explain. He had a career as a lawyer. And late in life, in the 1950s, he decided to go into business as a retailer. Now, people widely claim, I think correctly, that Saul Price is the father of modern retail. Almost all big box retail you can trace its origin back to him. Just to give one of my favorite examples, the reason why Walmart is called Walmart is because Sam Walton was paying homage. He was influenced by Saul Price's FedMart, the original big box retail store. So FedMart was the company he started in San Diego, my hometown. Now, he was a lawyer, and as a lawyer, he had what was called a fiduciary duty to his client. We all want this from our lawyer. Your lawyer is required to put the client's interests before their own. So when he became a retailer, he asked himself, who's my client? And to him, it was very obvious that the answer was his customer. So he said, I have a fiduciary duty to my customer. In fact, he set up a fiduciary hierarchy for the company, a hierarchy we see in a lot of the very best companies. He said it should be customers first, employees second, shareholders last. Now, it's not always exactly the same. For example, the great Peter Drucker said it should be employees first, customers second, shareholders last. If you look at the Johnson & Johnson, our credo, it's patients first, doctors and nurses second, employees third, communities fourth, shareholders last. Notice the pattern? Contra to today's best practice, the very best companies in history always understood that shareholders were last, not because shareholders aren't important, but because shareholder value is created by doing a specific thing for a specific person. So he had a fiduciary commitment to his customers. He paid above market wages, even though he didn't have to. He really believed in trustworthiness as a strategy. So he wanted his company to really reflect that people could trust it. I'll give you an example. There's so many of these funny Saul Price stories about the times when he did the right thing when he didn't have to. Here's my favorite. In the early days of FedMart, his competitors were trying to drive him out of business because they saw him as a threat. Naturally, he was in fact a big threat. And the idea is that, well, you just lose money for a while by selling lost leaders to get customers into your store instead of your competitor's store. You drive the store out of business, and then you can jack up prices all you want. You don't have as much competition. So they would try that. They would sell various staple products below their own costs, and they would advertise, hey, don't shop at FedMart. Their prices are actually higher than ours on this staple good. Every time they would do that, Saul would take their advertisements, which were printed in a newspaper. We're talking about the 50s and 60s here. He would post the ads inside his own store. And he'd put up signs that say, listen, don't buy eggs from me. They're cheaper down the street. Because he was a fiduciary to the customer. He didn't care where they got them. If they got a lower price somewhere else, he would help them do that. That is practically unthinkable today. Even like, you imagine some DTC brand and you go to their website and they're like, actually, Amazon has the cheaper price. He would never do that. Impossible. Inconceivable, right? They want you to have to do the labor of figuring out who has the lowest price and hope that you make a mistake. And then they make a little extra money. Why? And then they're like, why does no one trust us? Well, Saul Price understood. So this was like the elements of an interlocking engine. It was a system that he built painstakingly to have this company really reflect a very particular ethos. So it worked. The company grew, became super profitable. Everything was going great. He took the company public. But he had investors the whole time, and the investors were always on him to return to best practices in retail. Retailers tended to see customers as a resource to be mined, not as partners in an enterprise. So they didn't like the fiduciary duty thing. Obviously, over this time period, our country became enamored with the idea of shareholder primacy, that is investors first, not investors last. So he was already a countercultural figure from the very beginning. And I always tell founders and leaders, this is really critical, again, to understand the communication challenge ahead of you. The reason it's so difficult to communicate any commitment to a higher purpose, whether as lofty as we're going to fix climate change or as humble as I just want to make a high quality product. I want to bring a little beauty into my customers' lives. I want to make some business process a little more efficient so that somebody doesn't have to do such annoying manual labor. Like whatever specific thing you want to do, you are already a business revolutionary. You are at odds with our entire business culture, which is trying to get you to be as maximally exploitative, as maximally extractive as possible. By understanding this challenge, you understand why it's so hard to communicate about it, because people are getting this conflicting message and there's all these conflicting rewards that are affecting their career. Anyway, back to Saul Price. He was so frustrated with being a public company that he decided to take the company private. He arranged for a syndicate of investors to take the company private who were very knowledgeable about retail. So he figured they'd understand better. They were 51% owners. He was a 49% owner of the new entity that went private. And his problems got worse, not better. Because the new board, all they wanted was conventional retail, faster growth, higher prices. They didn't understand his system. They didn't like it. I think actually perversely, they understood something that he never did. They understood that precisely because his system was so trustworthy, he could betray his customers and they wouldn't notice. And this is the real dilemma of our time, that we're teaching people that success will give them the freedom, the power to make things the way that they want without realizing that success makes you a target. The more successful, the more valuable it is for someone to steal it from you. The reason why FedMart grew, the reason why it was so successful is because Saul Price had built an ethos, not his personal ethos. He had built an ethos into the company. And this required a series of interlocking practices that allowed every person in the organization to understand what his philosophy was. I call this principle harder is easier. So on the one hand, people have to do a lot of extra work. There's all these funny stories about how uncompromising Saul could be. And the great leaders are all like this in a certain way. What I've noticed is the really great leaders, they recognize that their ethos, their principles are going to put them into conflict with reality all the time. You know, it would be a lot easier, to raise prices. It would be a lot easier to, take a free lunch from a supplier from time to time. It would be easier not to put up the ads telling your customers to leave your own store and go to your competitors. But because the great leaders understand that the goal of leadership is not to make their life easy. The goal of leadership is to teach. Mary Parker Follett, the great lost prophet of management, she said, the purpose of a leader is to make more leaders. The harder is easier leaders, they revel in the difficulty. They love it. The fact that it creates these conflicts creates teaching opportunities, more and more and more opportunities for them to, first of all, demonstrate through their actions that they're really committed to their principles, and opportunities for others in the organization to start to internalize those values. And anytime if you do this often enough, you'll start to notice the misalignments. You're like, oh, I see. I'm paying this person to oppose. Okay, good. Fix that. And okay, fix that. And it allows them to go deep, deep, deep into their own organization to really bring it into alignment. So how did investors react to all this? Very badly. In 1975, Saul Price comes to work one day, and the locks on his doors have been changed. He can't get into his own office because he doesn't work there anymore. So the investors got what they wanted. The external gravity eventually cracked the organization open and allowed it to conform to best practices. What happened as a result? Well, within 7 years, FedMart had been completely liquidated. By betraying the trust of their customers, by pursuing faster growth in the typical business playbook, FedMart utterly failed. But Saul Price was not done. So I'll tell you one more part of his story, if you don't mind. He took 2 weeks off, classic entrepreneur. He took 2 weeks off to lick his wounds. And 2 weeks later, he leased the office upstairs from FedMart headquarters in the same building and was back at work. He built a company called Price Club, which today has mostly been forgotten because after a number of years of Price Club's success, it merged with another company started by one of the executives who had left FedMart to go to Price Club with him, who eventually struck out on his own, created his own similar big box retail. When Price Club and this other company merged, they formed the modern day Costco, which now has a $400 billion valuation thanks to its ability to maintain this Saul Price ethos. You'll see his principles all over a Costco warehouse.
When you tell these stories, Eric, when you share these ideas and also reading your book, you make me think. I go back to my university days where at some point I studied in Italy. Now I live in the UK, but I had a professor from the US, from Ohio, and he recommended, because I was very passionate about business as a force for good and those kind of topics, and he recommended a book, Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh from Zappos. And I don't know because since then I haven't been following the journey of the company Zappos. I don't know whether they are still living and protecting the original mission that they had, or whether it's one of those companies that drifted away from the mission. I have no idea. But I remember that when I read that book, sometimes I was crying, because those ideas are super powerful, and you are making me go back to those moments.
I'm really glad to hear that. I think, yeah, like, very people love Lean Startup. I still get people who call me, I get so much praise about it. I feel it's almost ridiculous how much credit people give to me as opposed to all the entrepreneurs who did the actual work of proving that the principles can work. But yeah, people never said that the book never made them cry. And so I've been really very pleased and astonished at the emotional reaction people have had to reading this book, which means a lot to me, because it is a more personal thing. It affects so much of us, like so much of our lives are being affected by these forces. In the book, I talk about this, like the explanations in this book are not just about corporate boardrooms. They explain like so many different things, like why is transit cost out of control in this country? How come we can't construct subways anymore? Why is journalism in decline? Why have political parties collapsed? Like why your favorite sports team has ownership that drives you crazy? Like there's so many things. We mentioned private equity and the food you can taste. something like 5% of acquisitions, corporate M&A acquisitions in the pharmaceutical space are what are called killer acquisitions. We only know pharma has enough public data that we can tell that the acquisition is designed to shut down the R&D of the competitor rather than to create any kind of value. I could do this all day. There's so many of these forms of corruption that are leaking into every aspect of life because thanks to financialization, we no longer have separate civic spheres. Our grandparents understood sports to be separate from politics, to be separate from nonprofits, to be separate from the social capital sphere, which we don't even have anymore, the Elks Lodge and all the things you read about in Bowling Alone. We only have one sphere of finance. It's all encompassing. And so we can't even imagine the fact that our grandparents trusted the organizations that governed their life. They had a sense of safety and calm. They trusted they could work at a place for many decades. They trusted that their local civic institutions would take care of their local infrastructure. They had a sense that people were more likely than not, if they were in a leadership position, to follow the Spider-Man rule of with great power comes great responsibility. Like, we find those stories so hard to believe. And the biggest difference between them and us is many of the ways of making money that we celebrate today. They would have seen not only as morally dubious, but most of them would have been. So we've really lost the plot and taken what I consider to be a civilization level wrong turn with some of these ideas. It's time that we who build things for a living, we leaders, we builders, creators, artists, scientists, engineers, we who are makers, who have that what I call the builder's intuition deep down. We understand that the best way to make money is to create new value in the world and capture a little for yourself. What Tim O'Reilly calls create more value than you capture. Those people need to stand up and be counted and say, you know what, this is not the economic system for us. We never really thought it made sense. I know we're all supposed to pretend that we think all ways of making money are equal, but we don't. You don't. And it's just, can you get comfortable saying it out loud? If you read the literature, the governance literature about shareholder primacy, because remember, shareholder primacy is an idea with no democratic legitimacy. It was never passed by any referendum or legislative action. It was just decided upon by a very small cabal of elite thinkers. So when you read what they write about it, why is shareholder primacy the law of the land? They say, well, it's effectively what they call a normative consensus, that pretty much everyone who matters has decided that this is not just a description of what companies do, but what they ought to do. It's a moral consensus that companies ought to exist only to enrich their shareholders, and any other externality, aka your health and well-being, should matter to them only insofar as it helps their investors make money. So if you would like to break this normative consensus, which I recommend, you don't have to take out an op-ed in the New York Times. Don't worry, they won't print it anyway. You just have to tell a friend that you don't agree. That's it. Just say it out loud. Get practice saying it out loud. You don't need to be on stage. And then start to act like you believe it. When some product gets ruined, don't buy it. When you see someone trying to do the right thing, reward them with your business. Go work there. Say something nice about them. Post on social media. Like, there's so many things you can do to break the consensus. And yet most of us feel too afraid to take that first step. Believe me, once you take the first step, the subsequent steps are all a lot easier.
Eric, you at the very beginning, you gave the example of Instagram and Facebook. And when you did that, you made me think of another book I read a few months ago, The Anxious Generation.
Yeah.
This is perhaps goes beyond this conversation, but as a dad, that book had a massive impact on me, on my life, on our family. But anyway, for your book, for those who want to learn more about and go deeper, learn more about the ideas in your book, in addition to pre-ordering or buying it, where should they go if they'd like to learn more?
Well, thank you for asking. You can go to incorruptible.co. Incorruptible.co is the main book website. There you can find all the different retailers that are carrying it, which is pretty much all of them. You can get it pretty much anywhere. You can get the book in hardcover, in ebook, in audiobook. I personally narrate the audiobook, so I'm very proud of how it turned out. There's bonus content in the audiobook you can't get anywhere else. And on the incorruptible.co website, we tried to create every possible incentive we could think of for you to pre-order the book, to sign up for the mailing list, to get all kinds of bonuses. So there's like a secret chapter, some extras material that is not available anywhere else. We're doing author Q&As. We have reader's guides for those who are in different roles. So if you're a board member or you want to understand the concepts from the employee perspective, from the customer perspective, from the founder perspective, we have guides for each. And we have implementation guides. If you've heard some of these ideas, if you read the book, you're like, wow, I really want to do this in my organization, or I want to help others do it. We have detailed step-by-step implementation guides, all that stuff you can get at incorruptible.co. And my favorite feature of the website is you can also find links to all of the independent bookstores across this country who are carrying the book. And so if you want to, of course, anywhere you buy the book, you're helping me. And I'm extremely grateful for you to check it out. You can't understand how valuable it is if you have a friend who's an author. Well, you know how valuable it is if someone will take their time to just, spend the $32 and pre-order the book. But not only can you support me if you buy it in an independent bookstore, now you're helping strengthen your own community, because bookstores are such important community institutions. And as I think everybody knows, they're under tremendous pressure these days. So why don't you help an independent bookstore out? You can find links to all of them all at incorruptible.co. Or you can buy the book, like I said, wherever is most convenient for you. If you do, I'm especially grateful. Thanks for asking.
And the link will be in the show notes. And of course, I had a look at at that website that you mentioned. And because I'm also in the process of launching my book, I looked at your website, and like it's 1,000 times in terms of the bonuses and the incentives and everything. It's 1,000 times better than what we have for my book. So again, I told you I envied you for the one-word title, also for the website as well. Congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. All credit to my team who built it, and to Wonder Dogs, the agency in San Francisco who actually did the web design for the page. Yeah. It's really good. And of course, the whole thing depends on the incredible cover design for the book. I don't know here. We just got these from the printer, so. Here's what the actual cover looks like. Can you see the iridescent sheen? Yeah, this is a design by Marcus Gosling, my longtime design collaborator. He's a remarkable remarkable designer. So
great cover. Eric,
it's all coming together. It's all coming together.
Let's finish with this. Let's say that someone watches or listens to this conversation, and in a few days they'll forget most of it. It's not your fault. It's just the way our brain works.
Yeah.
But let's say that they remember one thing, and if they remember that thing, you would be happy. What's the most important thing, especially if you think about founders, entrepreneurs, business leaders, for whom communication is central to what they do? What's the most important thing they need to take away from this conversation?
Just so many things. If you study mission-driven businesses and leaders like Matthew Prince or Saul Price, these legends, you will notice this very striking pattern. They seem to have superpowers. These organizations seem to they have like magnetic attraction. Just whenever they need something, the thing they need appears. When they get knocked down, they get right back up. Their people seem to understand what's communicated extremely well, and they don't spend a lot of time on employee comms as a result. They seem to be able to raise money. They seem to be able to inspire tremendous loyalty. And I really wanted to understand the why. And so if you only remember one thing, remember this. All of these superpowers are powered by one thing. And this is not my theory. This is not my just so story. There's tremendous evidence. We have all these studies to back this up. Trustworthiness is the most underrated asset in business today. If you remember that one, no matter nothing else, remember that one thing. If you can figure out the conditions under which people can trust you, all this other good stuff will happen. But remember the warning. If you find a way to stockpile this most precious asset, people will try to steal it from you. So be trustworthy, and then build a freaking vault around it. That's all you need to know.
Love it. Eric, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your ideas. Again, for everyone, Incorruptible, a wonderful business book. Maybe not a business book, as we said at the beginning, but 100% recommend it. Thanks again, Eric. It's been an honor for me to have this conversation.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and thanks everybody for listening.